Welcome to this CSIAC webinar. We are CSIAC, which along with DSIAC and HDIAC comprise the DoDIACs, operating under the Defense Technical Information Center within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. Our mission is to facilitate interagency collaboration, disseminate scientific technical information, and reduce redundancy amongst those who support the U.S. government. To achieve this, we offer several services and contract vehicles, including monthly webinars. Our webinars are hosted by subject matter experts on emerging research and technology topics. Technical inquiries. Submit a question and we will spend approximately 4 hours to answer for you. Enough to give you a jump start on your research or project, all at no cost to you. Technical publications. Peer-reviewed reports covering critical technology areas. Areas including cybersecurity, software data analysis, and modeling and simulation, plus support from our sister IACs. We help navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information to give you a research boost. Visit our website to learn more. Welcome to this CSIAC webinar.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar presentation. My name is Philip Payne. I am the technical lead for CSIAC, or the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center. Before we get started, I would like to note a couple of administrative items. First, if you are dialed in by phone and would like a copy of the slides, they were posted to the CSIAC webinar announcement. You can go to csiac.dtic.mil/webinars and find today's webinar. When you click on it, at the bottom of the announcement, it will say download presentation. Second, all participants are muted, but feel free to chat using the attendee chat window on the lower right-hand side of the webinar screen. You can use that to chat with each other, and I'll be monitoring that chat as well. However, if you'd like to pose a question for the Q&A session at the end, please post that in the Q&A session, and I will go over the Q&A at the end of the presentation. For the benefit of those on the phone, I'll read the questions out loud to the presenter. If you have any technical issues today, please have no fear. The full presentation will be available online. Please check back to the CSIAC website. Once the webinar is posted, that will take you to the YouTube link. With that said, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. His name is Brett Tucker. Brett is the Technical Manager of Cyber Risk Management in the Computer Emergency Response Team program at Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. He is responsible for research and development portfolio focused on improving the security and resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure and assets. He teaches executive and graduate level courses and serves as the technical sponsor for the Executive Chief Risk Officer Training Program. He has 20 years of experience in engineering, risk management, and technical management. Mr. Tucker was previously the Global Risk Manager for Westinghouse Electric Company, where he managed the corporate enterprise risk portfolio, global insurance programs, and project controls organization, as well as led the engineering, procurement, and installation of instrumentation and control suites for AP1000 nuclear plants. He has served as an intelligence officer at the Central Intelligence Agency and a defense contractor for the Naval Sea Systems Command. He's a veteran of the U.S. Navy and serves as a surface warfare officer and qualified naval nuclear engineer. Mr. Tucker holds a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Notre Dame, a master's degree in engineering management from Old Dominion University, and an MBA from Penn State University. He has been appointed as an advisor for Indiana Governor's Holcomb Executive Council for Cybersecurity. Brett, all yours.
Thanks. Pleasure, Phil. It's a pleasure to meet everybody today. Happy to jump in. As Phil said, if you all have comments, please feel free to put them in the chat so you can let me know. I'm going to start cruising here, and if I miss it, then apologies. He'll catch me if I'm falling, right? And we have so many great things to talk about today. First, I'm going to give you a little overview as to where I'm at and what I'm doing, so that way you all can keep me within choking distance if you need to reach out and ask questions or anything like that. So I'll go over what CERT is here in a minute. But more importantly, the reason why you're here today, I want to talk about risk programs and how you might build them out for your organization. There's so much to think about under this umbrella, but I'm going to break it down into 3 fundamental pillars for you. Talking about governance, let's face it, that's just people making decisions. Appetite, so that's the people making decisions. They have to have a clue as to how they're actually going to do that, and maybe even quantify that a little bit, right? Make it more logical rather than emotional. And then finally, there's this idea of doing the right thing because it's written down. We're going to talk about policy and procedure. So as a quick overview of the agenda, by the time you walk out of this, I trust that you'll have a fair understanding for at least the fundamental elements of what you need to have a good risk program going in your organization. And by the way, when I speak to risk, I'm going to say it in a general sense. It may be cyber, it may be enterprise risk, and let's be honest, we want those things to communicate together in one overall portfolio so you can make balanced decisions, and with one resource pool, be able to fund them all and at least carry forward with the proper assurance and confidence that you're going to deliver on mission. Okay, so just as a quick dump, as Phil said, I work at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm within the CERT program of the Software Engineering Institute. For those who don't know, this SEI is a federally funded research and development center, and we have contemporaries such as you might hear about MIT Lincoln Labs, organizations like that. For us, though, specifically, we specialize in software engineering, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and bring those things together. And we represent an organization that is a broker for information from academia, private sector, and from the government. And what we do is we provide solutions and ideas. We provide far horizon notification and awareness for technologies and how the federal government, how you at the Department of Defense can leverage those technologies in being more resilient, handling risk better, and you name it. It could be application based, it could be programmatically based. So a lot of good things going on here. This slide is almost like a screenshot for you if you want to go back and you're like, hey, what does CERT do again? And I'm not going to go through each of these bullets because it would just take too long, because there's just so many great research things here. But one thing I do want to leave you with as I go through this.
Hey, Brent.
Yeah.
Not to stop you. You could go ahead and share your slides now.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, here I thought it was sharing my slides. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries.
All right. I'm glad you said that because I thought it was already doing so. Hold on one second. I have the technology here. Okay. Is it sharing now? No?
Not yet.
Come on now. Give me a second. Why is it not? There we go. Now it should. Please tell me it does.
Yep, we got you.
Oh,
thanks.
Thank goodness. All right. Panic. Dead panic, Phil. All right. Back to it. All right. So CERT got you this, got you an understanding as to the things we do. This is the slide that I was speaking to. I said, hey, just take a snapshot in your brain, all the cool things. You can come back and revisit this later. As Phil said, he shared these slides with you. Apologize for the technical mishap there. What I wanted to leave you with, though, in terms of the Software Engineering Institute and CERT in general, all of you are in a sense cheating yourselves if you're not regularly visiting our site and taking advantage of a lot of the free resources we provide. We publish a lot on a lot of our documents, resources, research that we've been doing. There's a whole lot of great things that we do that if you have questions about, you will find it on our website. And you'll see that a lot of that research is born of a lot of our research partners. Like whether it's not the Department of Defense, we also partner with federal civilian agencies like CISA, Homeland Security at large, Treasury, Energy. I can just run the list down so much more. But if you have a question about all the way from training operations, cradle to grave, vulnerability analysis, how to build programs, if you want to benchmark, if you want to assess your organization, we have tons of resources. So please, like I said, do yourself a favor, go to the SCI website, look up publications. You can even look myself up, the things I've been publishing on. We have blogs, all that great stuff. Okay? So moving on, that gets us through what CERT is. Let's start with the topic today. Remember, the top three things I want to talk about are governance, appetite, and policy and procedure. So these fundamental pillars are important. And to be honest with you, I'm going to take the perspective of you having to sell this in your organization. Suppose you had to go to your boss on any given day and say, you know what, we're really not managing risk well here. I don't really understand, programmatically how we're addressing risk. Does everybody know the same thing? Does everybody understand the same thing? So the three fundamental things that you would tell your boss is, hey, I know we need a governance structure, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these. I'm going to decompose them. But we want to talk about the base of who's actually making these decisions. Are they making the right decisions? How is it being done? And where, when, the how, the why. Okay. Specifically to that point, if people are making decisions, they need to know the bounds within which they're making those decisions. So we talk about limits of authority. You may hear that. You may hear of it in terms of resource limitations, controls, whatever might be in place, so that somebody doesn't go and build $1 million fence around a stack of quarters. Clearly, that would be a problem. It's like an overspend of money. Are we spending too much and dulling the tip of that risk spear so that we can confidently navigate our mission, or are we not spending enough? That's where we're going to start talking about appetite and getting a fair sense as to how we can appreciate that, how we can even document it, and how you can cascade it down in an organization to get them to better know how to apply it to making everyday risk decisions. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the policy procedure piece. And I kind of relate it this way. If you've ever heard of that notion of if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there, does it really make a sound? Well, I'm going to recast that for you today. I want to say to the point of if there's direction in an organization, does anybody really do it unless it's written down, right? And policy can extend beyond the idea of just setting expectations, right? It actually is the fundamental cornerstone of and foundation of good culture, risk-based culture in your organization. Now, what has to come along with that is the how. The policy answers the who, what, when, where, why, and the procedure is more like the how are you going to do it, getting into every nitty-gritty details as to how things are going to happen in your organization. So I'm going to talk about how you can document and do that better today as well. Okay, so I've set the stage, right? And I am convinced, having done this personally, having seen this done in many organizations across government, both in public and private sector, it all starts with governance. Let's face it, if you're doing risk management and you're documenting these risks, you identify them, it does you no good if you just yell into the void and no one responds to you or gives you resources for doing anything with them. So what you need to do is have a structure of individuals who have the authority, who have the resources to help you respond to risk properly. Okay, so how are we going to do this? My humble recommendation, and by the way, this can be done in many myriad of ways. For example, let's just say, it's a surface ship in the Navy, right? Let's say it's a ship that has a captain. The captain's probably the ultimate adjudicator and decider of where resources get allocated if a risk comes up, right? They're the final decision-making authority. But that's not necessarily how most organizations are built. Most organizations and commands may have not just a commanding officer, but they may actually have a staff. Maybe they have an adjutant, an executive officer, or something like that, who's helping to make those decisions. But let's face it, if you're a good commanding officer, if you're a good adjutant, you're going to recognize the idea that you don't know everything. So what you may want to do is establish a board, a consulting board. It may be their advisory, maybe they actually have authority to make decisions. And in private organizations, you see this play out with the terms like executive board. You may hear terms like risk committee or risk subcommittee. And when I say those words, I want you to kind of capture this image in your mind. It's a pyramid, if you will. And what you have at the executive board level are senior executives who know the organization well, who have the best intentions in mind. But that executive board may be more strategic in nature. And as you get down into the ranks, as you get down into this governance structure, you're going to find that it's more and more at a tactical level. For example, suppose I have a risk subcommittee at the lowest level that is established based upon its function, that is established based to address cyber risk specifically. You may have other boards, risk subcommittees rather, that deal with ethics, operations, finances. Whatever the case may be, these risk subcommittees are comprised of people who are experts in their field and have a good understanding for the way that risks should be addressed that have come to them. If it's a liquidity issue, if it's a specific cyber risk management issue, like let's say ransomware or something to that effect. Now, what they would do at that bottom level is they would analyze the risk. They would get an understanding for what an appropriate response would be for the organization. Are they going to mitigate it? Are they going to accept it? Are they going to avoid it? Are they going to transfer it? They're going to build that solution, and they're going to bump it up to that next level, that risk committee level. So this is where you have maybe that commanding officer and their staff that's going to help them understand how to take action on that risk. And maybe that commanding officer needs to go to a higher level at that. Maybe they have to go to a level above their command. Once again, going to the Navy, maybe it's from a ship, you're going to go to the squadron, and from a squadron, you go to the fleet, and so on. And that builds you into that executive board nature, the idea of people who are at that higher level of oversight that are providing maybe more that strategic view rather than the tactical picture at the scene. Okay? Now, when you build a governance structure like this, you're typically going to have a charter built at each one of these levels. And what do I mean when I say charter? This is somewhat goes back to the policy procedure, which I'm going to touch more upon here in the next few slides. But what you really need to focus on is the idea that the people on these boards, in these committees, know specifically what they're there to do. What is their level and limit of authority? And more importantly, I'm going to go to the next slide, what are the actions that they take where they're actually making impactful decisions and they're pressing those decisions down the organization, and what kind of information they're expecting to receive from the organization. And I call these communication paths, which are represented by the gray arrows on each side of this pyramid, for example. You'll see that at the board level, we're developing the policy, the procedure, or actually more at the risk board, the executive level, they're deciding what the policy should be. Maybe they're approving it. And then what they're saying to risk committee and others below, they're saying, hey, cascade this down the organization and make sure that people at the lowest level understand what their duties are with respect to risk management in that organization. So they're also giving direction, they're giving resources, they're delegating ownership for who's going to be doing what in the organization. And what should be coming back is this notion of, hey, what measurement or metrics do we have to understand that we're actually doing the right thing? Are our decisions making impacts? Also, we want to understand, are we learning lessons from the risks that we're addressing? Is there any kind of programmatic feedback that we can take in hand and actually make meaningful changes to the structure of what we have here today? Okay, so we have a sense of who's doing what. We have a sense of who's sitting where and who's making what decisions. But as you see these gray arrows and you see these communications going on, you may get an executive board or maybe even a risk committee member that says, hey, risk subcommittee that considers cyber risk management. No offense, but you're pumping up a lot of risk to us that we pay you to make those decisions. At the tactical level, we want you to decide how you configure your firewalls. We want you to decide how you're going to implement multi-factor authentication, or whatever the example may be. Now, that can be related or translated via risk appetite. So let's talk a little bit about risk appetite. Remember, you have the decision makers. They have this certain tolerance. Maybe it's in their heart, maybe it's in their mind, right? Sometimes risk tolerance can be an emotional action as much as it is a logical and or quantitative discussion. But appetite at the high level is the amount of risk or uncertainty an organization is willing to accept or bring on to go about its daily duties. And you're like, well, Brett, that's kind of soft. I mean, what does it mean to have a risk? And what does it mean to think about taking more risk in an organization than maybe my body can cash, or the bigger than the checkbook that I can manage? So just having that discussion of how much is hard enough as it is. And we're going to get down to like this measurement discussion in a minute. More importantly, you have to know why your organization needs it first. Okay, so we know that we have strategic objectives, and at a high level, you can see that a command has a strategic vision for what it needs to do. And it may be the idea of defending a specific theater or something to that effect, right? And in doing so, maybe there's no exceptions for safety incidents, right? Safety is a very high premium. We value life and limb of our soldiers, sailors, guardians, Marines, and we really care about the fact that if we're engaged in any operations that are maybe in peacetime operations, that people are, at the utmost operating at their safest level. Well, what does that necessarily mean in terms of translation of doing specific activities, right? Maybe we don't accomplish as much in terms of number of boats that come into a shore for an exercise on landing Marines, because let's face it, if we do too many boats, maybe there'll be collisions, maybe there'll be some people who go in the drink, that kind of thing. Okay, so what I just got down to is this notion of the strategic vision boiling down into tactical implementation. Notice too, as I'm talking about this, that the appetite really comes from the organization's appetite. So the commanding officer, their staff, the people in the organization, everybody has a different conception for what they're willing to accept. And let's go back to the boat example of how many we're putting on a beach. Is it 15? Is it 20? How big's the beach? I don't know. There's a lot of context around that discussion, isn't there? Excuse me. So you have to write it down. You have to document what that quantitative number is in your heart and mind. That said, if you get down to fewer boats, let's say 5 I'm trying to put on the beach, the CO at that point may say, hey, look, that's the craftmaster's decision. They're going to operate in tandem with each other. They're going to put so many landing craft on the beach. They're going to decide where it's going to be, tactically speaking, because they're getting a read at that level. Okay. This looks like something like this is you document it. Okay, so what I've just given you is this notion of levels or layers of decision makers. See the on the far left in gray, you have the executive level attention, you have the management attention, and then you have frontline attention. That's the people who care and are making decisions at that risk level. And then going across from left to right, you see that I have different categories of risk and how we may think of it. Now, this is more for a private organization or let's say more like an organization that's not necessarily employing military operations, because I wanted to kind of capture the notion that we actually hit upon a lot of the same categories. For example, most organizations are concerned about revenue and profit. Now, coming from left to right, safety may be more your bigger concern. So you would move safety farther to left and treat it as your #1 priority. Either way, I want you to note that in the tolerances, the actual discussion that's in the block, notice that I try to be quantitative with it. Any more than a 10% deviation from operating profit. Now, safety, it's loss of life or limb, but we may think about this in terms of recordables and reportables for OSHA, if you're in most organizations, right? Notice for operations, the operations column, it's 3 days lost, no more than 1 day lost, no more than 1 shift lost. Those are quantitative numbers that you can actually wrap your mind and brain around and know that there is a crossover point. Hey, if we have identified a risk that may in fact impact us for greater than 3 days, we know we need to go to the highest level to make a decision as to what we're going to do about that risk. Some other categories you may want to think about: reputation, maybe it's compliance, maybe it's retention of people, human capital projects. I will say that this is a simplified view, and I want to be cautious in how I prescribe what I'm giving here. Yes, you could take a screenshot of this. Yes, you could try to implement your organization, but I would ask, if you do, to try to be as quantitative as possible. Also, I would ask that when you go through this, that you think about different ways to measure each of these items. Like safety, for example, I have loss of life for permanent disability. Think about what that measurement may look like if you're in another organization that must comply with OSHA regulations. So now you're talking about the recordable reportables. Revenue, for example, I may not be thinking just about profit. Maybe I'm also thinking about costs. Maybe I'm thinking about stakeholders. Maybe I'm thinking about stock value, things like that. So what I'm saying is, in these blocks, you may have more than one metric or measure to understand how you communicate risk appetite. If you do that, I would also insist that that same metric is found at each level, just at different tolerances, right? So for example, let's go back to the OSHA example for safety. If I have loss of life or permanent disability, and I also measure in terms of recordable reportables, I need to have the recordable reportables in each level as well, and they're just going to be at different level or different tolerances, different quantitative levels. So 0, or let's say if it's 1 recordable, 1 reportable, and that's at the highest level of executive attention because a risk may result in that, fine. But the next level down, you're going to talk about recordables and reportables, and maybe at that case, maybe it's only recordables that are allowed to be risks that are decided upon at that level, and then nothing at the front line. Like we want 0 safety issues at the front line. So if you see a risk that comes up, at the minimum, you're going to management attention. Another interesting thing here is that risk appetite can be measured in many different ways. I've given you a sense here for these different categories, right? I would recommend that you go beyond just impacts. This table is specifically focused on impacts of risk. You may also measure risk appetite in terms of likelihood, maybe it's controllability, maybe it's the velocity of a risk. As a reminder, velocity of risk is how close to the cart that risk is in terms of happening, right, in an organization. There are risks that come up because they're seasonal or maybe they're operational. Maybe you focus on them at that particular time, but when you leave that theater of operations, they're not concerned. So I don't have a velocity table here, but that would be another example. Another thing too, you might want to notice, I have a quantitative tolerance in my likelihood table, and I also have a qualitative tolerance, because not everybody is geared in their brain to actually translate or feel or understand likelihood of a risk. Okay, so if that's the case, maybe you relate it to them in a way that says, hey, has this risk like happened within our industry or within our battle group within, I don't know, the past year, within the past few months? So that would translate necessarily to a percentage or a likelihood that you could also relate in this same category, okay? One more thing I want to note. Notice how I have the words red, yellow, green on the left? Now those are relics because I've actually considered eliminating them over time through research and through understanding of how people apply it. People hate colors. If they see a risk that comes up as red, what's the first thing they're going to do? A, they're going to hide it, or B, they don't want to talk about it because they think that they're going to get squashed by their executive team when they start bringing these red risks to the table. There's going to be a lot of panic, a lot of consternation. People are not going to be happy, right? So what I would recommend is to try to eliminate the stigma of how we rate and rank these risks. You may write the word red, but I would even suggest going as far as eliminating the color and eliminating even the discussion of the fact that that's a red risk. Rather, it's the level of attention that's necessary. And when you build a risk culture in an organization, you're going to also want to think about this notion of, hey, look, you're going to go get executive attention not because you're broken. It's because clearly you have a risk that is so much gravity to it, you need help. We're here to get you help. And this is not like, you know, in the government, I'm here to help kind of a thing. This is like, no, we're going to get you resources. We're going to get you people. We're going to get you money. We're going to get you time. We're going to get training, whatever it is to help insulate you from that risk coming to fruition. I mean, you may think about this in terms of deployment of operations for, once again, let's say it's some kind of military operation where maybe you need additional people, maybe you need additional assets, air support, things of that nature. If we can quantify more in that area, you will see your risk culture become far more vibrant, and you'll actually see more risks come to the table. People will be more willing to share them with you. And this discussion of risk appetite serves as that lens to help provide the organization that appreciation for the kind of level and support you can bring them. I'm going to leave you with one more idea here too. As I speak to impacts, this table could actually serve as a check on decisions that your governance structure is making. So let me give you an example of that. Suppose somebody comes to you with a risk that could result in a $10 million impact to your organization. And that's terrifying. I don't know about you, but $10 is a lot of money to me. So 10 million would make my heart flutter. Like, I know where that needs to go. That needs to go to that executive level attention. And you look at that bound, and we know that 10%, and I'm making this up by the way, but let's just say 10% of planned operating profit or deviation is something like $1 million, right? So it's a small organization. Okay, fine. Right, so 10 million is 10 times what that band of tolerance is dictating. So I would come to you with a plan and say, hey, look, I have a $2 million plan that's going to be a response plan to alleviating this risk. Do you care enough? And they'd say, you know what, we care if it's $1 million risk. You're saying it's a $2 million solution to keep $10 million away. Now, I would not be able to give you an exact answer here because it's going to come down to a judgment call, right? And it's going to depend on likelihood and maybe velocity controllability, that kind of thing. But what it's doing is it's setting the stage for that discussion. So once again, I know as a leader, when I made that decision, did I build that $1 million fence around a stack of quarters, or did I do the right thing? And that quantitative nature of your risk appetite statement is critical to gaining that appreciation. Okay, so let's move on to the next, policy and procedure. Imagine a world, and this is especially true in private industry, I'd imagine that you would also see it in federal government as well, where you have direction that you want to cascade down to people of all types of backgrounds, cultures, training, levels and degrees of capabilities and skills. How is it that you relate this information in that same nature to every single one of those people, from the E1 all the way up to the 05, 06 and higher levels, that kind of an idea, right? And even higher than that, if you're starting to talk about strategy. So the notion of writing a good policy, the notion of writing these expectations down, is keeping it in the simplest language possible. I highly recommend a 5th, 6th grade reading level tops. It's almost like reading the newspaper, right? For those of you who've ever heard, like they say to newspaper editors, like, hey, you got to write it, 5th grade, 6th grade reading level tops, so that even the your reader who maybe does not have an education, maybe can read it and understand it and take information away from it. Policy and procedure writing is no different. And actually, this comes up in private industry a lot. If you think about it, and just to kind of like gauge your brain as to how this kind of works out, think about having a national organization, international organization, where I'm having offices in China, in Europe, in Africa, in South America, and in the United States, and I need to cascade the same direction to all of them. If I hand advanced language with a lot of lingo, with a lot of acronyms, things like that in it, your translator is going to struggle to put that into something that's meaningful for everybody of every different bolt of cloth that's out there. So it's very important that you keep your language in simplistic terms. So simple to read, easy to follow. It's very important. Not only that, but you should think about not only accommodating cultures, but how is it that you accommodate the culture so that everybody steps together and is on one page with you in your risk-based decision-making culture, right? So this is the notion that maybe, and I'm making this up, but maybe people in a Western society have a feeling of greater authority. Maybe for whatever reason they feel that they can make bigger decisions, where in maybe a whole nother culture, people feel like they need more approval. They need to seek some sort of head nod or maybe even written approval to get a decision to be made in their organization. So if that's the case, you have to level set who's at what levels and who's making what decisions and be very clear about that, cited by position, cited by role. So that comes down to the idea of making these policies enforceable. If someone oversteps their bounds, what's the result? And this comes back to like the carrot or stick idea. Clearly, you don't want to, if it's a serious enough issue, I guess it could come down to maybe firing somebody or maybe, greater impacts than that. But the notion here is that you have someone who owns your program, who is going to employ it, and who can provide direction down in the organization to people who need to understand what they need to do at any given point. This is going to bring me to the idea of procedure. I'm going to come back to that bullet in a minute. But basically, you're giving people this image of what's the strategy overall, and how do I meet that strategy and expectations. Interestingly enough, you want to convey that from day number one. The first day that someone gets the command, they should have a discussion of risk and how it's addressed in that organization here now. So that way there's no tolerance for anyone coming in and saying, well, I didn't know we had a risk management program, right? I identified it, but to be honest with you, I didn't know who to go talk to. So risk culture starts day one with everybody, regardless of level of in the organization. Okay. Policies have to be scalable. That that makes sense. You know, is it applicable to every department on a ship or within a command? That kind of an idea. And once again, too, not only is it approved at the highest levels, there's advocacy down. In other words, I'm pushing down that direction down the organization, insisting that my people follow that policy, and I hold my expectations high that they meet it. And also, I'm regularly reviewing it and updating and keeping that policy fresh and relevant to my command too. No one picks up a policy from 1990s and says, "Oh, this must still be a thing. We're still following this." No, it's 2025. So, what is that update frequency? What does that periodicity look like in your organization? It may be annual, which is what we recommend, but it may be, I don't know, sooner than that. Maybe there are changes to your command in terms of maybe command structure, maybe mission, maybe strategy, that you need to go back and revisit your policies more regularly when those things happen. I call those like tripwires of knowing when you need to go actually update your policy. Okay. Another couple of things you can think about, and this is actually more germane to the private sector, but I'm going to say it anyway because there are auditors, I understand, within DoD that could help. Auditors are really keen at knowing and understanding what a demonstrable artifact or a piece of evidence is to show that someone's doing the right thing. This can be so easy. Let me put this in the easiest of words. Suppose I have a sailor or a soldier or a Marine or a Guardian who identifies a risk. They're like, hey, this seems risky to me. What do I do? Where do I write it down? Who do I tell? Right? So then maybe they go in and do that, and they maybe log it into a system. Maybe you have something on maybe a web-based application or something like that. They key it in, they hit the send button, and that immediately becomes an artifact, a piece of evidence that shows that people in the command are actually following the policy, following the procedure, and doing what's right to get decisions to be made. Okay? Your friend, the auditor, can tell you, yeah, that looks like a reasonable artifact, or no, it doesn't have enough information. You need to provide greater direction on what to include in that piece of evidence, like, you know, more details, more structure, whatever the case may be. Okay, so be specific where necessary so that people know specifically what to do. Now, I've gone through the 3 pillars. I've gone through governance, talked about that, who's making decisions. I've talked about appetite, how they're making those decisions, how that's quantified with risk tolerances, things of that nature. And I just talked about policy and procedure, how to write it, all that good stuff, right? But let's start from the very beginning. One is stop panicking, because I know I panicked when I first found out I was taking a job like this, where you're building something like this out for an organization. Your first move is to clearly panic. But once you get your thoughts together on how to approach this, you get very base in your understanding. And you have to recognize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. A risk program doesn't get built overnight. Risk culture certainly does not get built overnight. So start with the fundamentals. And I'll give you an easy example here. In your policy, right up front, you talk about who owns that document. You talk about, you know, who approved it and why you're following it. Great. But one of the first things you might want to do is define risk. You know, a good example is we define risk in our organization as uncertainty. No more, no less. And when I say uncertainty, it could be a positive thing. It could be very much an opportunity, as much as there is a threat, right? I know there are people out there who may, in fact, you know, play the lottery, for example. And you're like, no, it's a sucker bet. But other people are like, look, you don't win if you don't play. So there's 2 sides of that risk coin, of seeing opportunity risk as much as there's seeing threats. Okay, so that is an easy item that you clarify right away, right up front in your policy, and make sure that everybody knows it. More importantly, people need to know what their responsibilities are, what they're accountable for, who they support. Do they provide information? Maybe there are people that just maybe receive information, right? You can capture this in what we call a RASCI or RACI table. Maybe you've seen these before, but it's nothing more than a listing of the folks in your organization and the activities they must abide by. So imagine if it's a spreadsheet, right? So you have the people in the organization, you have the activities as fields above, and then are they responsible? Are they accountable? Do they support? That kind of a thing, right? And you lay out specifically who's responsible for what in risk programming for your organization, risk program management for your organization. Another thing too is a lot of organizations fall short when they're not connecting their risk program to the strategy of the organization. So risk tends to be an overhead function. A lot of people, as a matter of fact, a lot of executives will say, look, I don't need a risk program. I put my seatbelt on every morning. I'm okay. I know what I'm doing, right? And you're like, wait a second, there's more to it than that, right? There's more to it than just like understanding like immediate risk of like getting in a car accident, which by the way, I acknowledge, I think that's a great thing, but we have to think about impacts and likelihoods and far more complex issues than just getting in an accident, right? Think about ransomware alone, for example. How much do you want to invest in training to prevent ransomware in your organization? And that starts talking about training programs. And if it's an hour per person in an organization, but you find out the organization is thousands of people, that's a lot of money, right? So it may not be as simple as just saying, go do training. That is why we connect our risk program to the strategy organization. Strategy is going to dictate what we need to accomplish, how we accomplish it, and how much we're willing to spend in accomplishing it, right? And in the military, obviously, it means a lot. There's a lot of gravity to the idea of how many soldiers I put at risk if I put boots on the ground, right? How many assets I put in theater that may actually be threatened. So it becomes a very significant discussion when we're talking about risk management and making these critical decisions. Some organizations may decide to measure the effect or efficacy of their program and how good they're doing business, basically, with a maturity model type approach. And I'm going to pause for a moment here. There's a document I've published. Remember, go back to the SCI website. Don't cheat yourselves. Go ahead and look up my name, and you'll find this discussion on a model called OCTAVE FORTE. And it doesn't matter. It's a big acronym. More importantly, what you get with FORTE is this entire discussion in a box. So for those of you who are thinking about starting a risk program out there, you can find on that SCI website under my name a Mad Libs kind of document. It's basically a template for a policy for any organization. It can be a military command, it can be a private organization, it can be public. At least it gives you the bones of what you need for a risk policy out of the box. So I recommend you go look at that. And the reason why I bring this up on that bulleted maturity model, you will see over time that the practices that you have prescribed in your initial policy you've published are going to mature. They're going to get more specific. You're going to get more defined. You're going to get more like, we have this lesson learned and we need to update it. And you may want to think about your program as being moored in a discussion of how are we getting better over time, rather than have we met the ultimate goal? Do we have a program? We're done. Let's walk away. Okay. This is, like I said, a marathon, not a sprint. It's an evolution. Okay. So another thing you may be thinking about is the compliance side of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about like models and frameworks and standards, best practices, things like that. And there's a whole lot of things to think about out there. I know for the Department of Defense, we're very much looking at NIST and directives coming out of SP 800 series, SP 153 for controls and cyber controls. We're looking at SP 135, we're looking at the NIST risk management framework. Now we're looking at the AI risk management framework. There's just so much direction out there. There's also other organizations that have a lot of good ideas that pertain to things like ISO 31000. ISO is international framework that and standard that deals with risk management. COSO is another one you may hear about. That's enterprise risk management. There's just COBIT, yet another. So as you're building this program out, it helps to get steeped in all of those if possible, or as best as possible. And once you do have an understanding, don't be bashful in terms of exploiting each of those models and frameworks for the practices that work best for you. In other words, don't feel like you have to go whole hog on one particular item. Let's say you're a huge COSO fan, but there are items within ISO that you really appreciate and think that didn't get mentioned well enough in COSO. So bring those in, put those in your policy as well. And that's why I have this funneling idea here. You're going to tailor your policy and your procedures so that it accommodates the context of your command and the risk program that you're building, right? Now, this does not represent an exhaustive level of what you could go to. You can find trusted advisors. There are people in the cyber insurance industry who have tons of thoughts on how to build and structure this kind of stuff. There are people at federal labs, at federally funded research development centers like myself. And I'm not just putting in a plug for SCI. You can talk to MITRE, you can talk to Lincoln Labs, you can talk to any number of vendors out there. There's tons of people with great opinions and great thoughts. And I'm not here to point to any one of them. Rather, I encourage you to go explore all of them. And that's a big charge. That's a big task, right? So you're going to feel overwhelmed. Google is your friend. So know where to start, right? There are publications we have on this. But here are some things that I want you to think about as you're going out to select that framework. The good news in all of this is that you're not alone. People have written about this. They have ideas and thoughts. But you need to think about fitting your context to, is it continuous? Does it align with my strategic objectives in my organization? Does it apply to all of my functions in my organization? Is it deliberate? Does it provide me metrics and means of measurement so I understand that things are getting done the right way? Do my auditors, do they accept this? Is this something that they care about? Do they encourage us to use NIST, but here I brought COAST to the table, so what good is it, right? That kind of thing. Is it something that can evolve with my organization? My organization today maybe is nascent, I just started it, but I have a vision for something much greater and grander. So how do I have a framework or model that I can grow into, that I can become more mature with, and have that risk program that evolves with the needs of your organization as well? So there are a lot of big decisions to be made here. Once again, not an exhaustive list, but rather a list that should percolate ideas in your mind as to how you're going to shop for proper direction in your organization. And just I thought I'd just throw a smattering of those directions here, so that way you have a sense. NIST CSF is a big one, and that's all the way over in a government space. But you also have independent organizations like CIS, Center for Internet Security, and people like that who are providing a lot of great information too. So once again, don't be bashful in how you select and how you apply them. Okay. So and I hit upon this in the policy bond, but I'm going to say it again. Like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take time. And what you need to do is understand which frameworks are scaling best to you and how you're going to relate that to your workforce. Does your workforce accept it? Can they be educated in it? Do they have the skills that they bring to the table that they can actually abide by this policy? And if not, what kind of training do I need to get them there? What kind of things can I do to help facilitate risks and identifying risks in your organization and doing that analysis? Do I need a bunch of acolytes or people who do risk specifically, and I send them down into the command and they're actually going to help facilitate and bake out risk analyses? Or is it that I'm training my whole command that everybody, regardless of their rank, grade, and skill set, are going to actually do the analyses themselves? So those are bigger questions that you need to think about as you're going from that framework side to the actual implementation side, and how I'm actually going to build this program out and make it work. It's got to be comprehensive in that sense. And it also, as all things in life, it's bounded by resources. So there's going to be some limits to what you can do. And this goes back to that maturity side. There are immediate things you're going to do today, those quick wins, and there are those things that you can do tomorrow. A quick win would be going to the SEO website, by the way, once again, not making a plug, but getting that policy and just using that as a free template, right? But maybe the next more pricier win is to go find a consultant or somebody like that who's willing to look at what you have, review it, and give you advice. And then maybe at the high end of the spectrum, now maybe you're the advisor who's actually cascading down your policy and organization, helping others build that out. So you want to think about where you're at in that journey and how you're going to meet your expectations in that regard. Okay, I hit upon this. Be aware of your standards that you're using. Some may be compulsory. Some of those frameworks may not be, in a sense, right? Let's see. We already talked about accommodating the industry size, culture, and regulations that may take place. I'm going to take one more minute to discuss how you may want to characterize or think about your organization and decomposing it. I told you, like, this is going to be comprehensive. It's going to span all the functions of your organization. I would encourage you to take an asset perspective of your organization. And what do you mean by that? Like, what am I saying, Brett? Like, the idea here is that I have overall goals of things I need to accomplish, and then I have specific functions that deliver on those goals. Let's say I'm making pencils for the day, right? Well, I have a carpentry shop that's turning out the body of said pencils. I have another shop that's cutting graphite. I have another part of the shop that's making rubber erasers. All of them are equally important. But let's face it, maybe life's not all about errors. So the eraser shop, maybe they don't need to have as much focus. I can keep operating and churning out pencils and get things written without the eraser part. So now I have like this, not to be deprecating to erasers, by the way, I use them often, but I have a sense for prioritization in my organization. And when I decompose that organization into the specific assets of either whether it's people, whether it's information, whether it's technology, the facilities they reside in, or maybe even third-party providers. I need to know where to look first in terms of who I care about the most, what I care about the most, if they're in fact impacted by risks, if there's a bad thing that can happen, or maybe an opportunity that could take root. That is where I start. So until you value stream map or decompose your organization of these assets, you're going to struggle with overall gross identification of risks. Okay. So what's risk management going to get you? No matter what, at the end of the day, prioritization is about the best you're going to get. You have a lot of things that are keeping you up at night. And by the way, those things may be keeping you up because they're so exciting, there's so much opportunity, you don't know what to do with yourself. You need to be able to prioritize. And you're going to prioritize in a quantitative sense. In other words, you want to analyze those risks and know how you're going to feel the pain, how likely it is, and you're going to use those numbers to set priority in your organization for where you're going to put your resources. Your resources may in fact be your time. How much time you're going to put to any given risk in terms of analysis. Maybe it's money, maybe it's a mitigation plan, maybe it's a tool you need to go buy. And those controls can only demonstrate value and be cost effective for you if you understand the magnitude of the impact that you're alleviating, that you're trying to get ahead of. Okay. So know your context, know who your enemy and your environment is, know what opportunities are out in your environment as well, right? Look where you may have, in fact, like high velocity risks. What are the things that are going to impact my organization first today, just being there? And that may even, in a sense, be overwhelming. But at least you are understanding like the risks that are keeping you up at night immediately versus ones that are more strategic in nature, right? And if you're building this program, always bring some kind of roadmap or some kind of project plan to the table. You're not going to be able to sell your organization on building a risk management plan or strategy or anything of that nature unless you have it written down and you have it characterized so that way you know the path and you know where you're going. So I'm going to pause now. If anyone has questions, I'm more than happy to take them. And the discussion doesn't end here. I am a free resource to you all. So please feel free to reach out to me. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if you have comments, concerns. We are here to serve you, Department of Defense, Department of War, excuse me, in terms of deploying and delivering upon your missions. So please let us know what's keeping you up at night and let us know how we can help. Phil, any questions?
Right. Thank you for that. That was a great presentation. We appreciate that. There were some questions in the chat about where we could get the slides. I just reposted the link for you guys to download that. You can go directly to the CSIAC website. It was posted to the webinar announcement. Please check the chat for that as well. There were also questions about whether or not this was going to be recorded. This is a distro webinar, so this will be recorded. It will be available directly from the CSIAC website, or within a day or two, will also be on the CSIAC YouTube page. So that's where you'll be able to get the recording as well. Had one or two participants place a hand up during the presentation. All participants are muted. So the Q&A is now open. Please put your questions in the chat. I see a couple people said they had some difficulty accessing the Q&A. You could just put your questions directly in the chat and we'll make sure to address those there. So there were a bunch of comments, but we did have a couple of questions, and I'll step through those now. Like I said, the Q&A is open, so feel free to use the chat. So one question we got from Patrick, he says, would it be possible? Give me 1 second. So people also asked for the location of where they can get OCTAVE. Yeah. There's a link that was put in the chat. Brett, if you could just double check that to make sure that is the latest and greatest, that would be great. But yeah, first question from Patrick. He says, please address quote unquote change in IT assets, artifacts, and DevSecOps continuous monitoring.
So those are, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Let me back up and say that risk management is an umbrella, okay, in an organization. It's enterprise based, right? DevSecOps is a practice within that umbrella that controls risk, right? We're worried about development of software assets, things of that nature, or we're worried about how our defense industrial base is producing software. So it's good to have this program as an overall umbrella and DevSecOps as a practice underneath. Break, go back to the idea of how much do I know to invest in that? How much do I know? Now I know there are free resources if you go to like JEDEP and or which was formerly JFAC and look at that website. There's tons of information on that. So there's a whole spectrum of implementation of DevSecOps as an example, and it costs money for each step in the spectrum that you're willing to take, right? How much you're willing to invest? Well, how great are your risks? How dependent is your mission on that software and in terms of its delivery? So this risk management discussion is bounding an understanding as to how much you want to implement each of those things that you listed. And I missed DevSecOps stuck in mind. What were the other elements there? Did I miss any, Phil? IT assets. Change in IT assets, artifacts. Okay. Another thing I talked about in the presentation that's important, Patrick, is to think about asset management from a high level, how it's delivered strategically, how it boils down to functions, and then each asset, how it contributes. There's another cool aspect here that I didn't talk about, but this is really neat. I did mention risk identification, but you're like, well, Brett, how does that happen? Imagine I've broken out a function. Let's say it's the pencil construction again, right? And I have carpenters building the bodies of my pencils. Well, maybe I need a lathe, I need a mill, things like that are actually making these parts. I could actually go in and deprecate or break each of those parts with a risk scenario and figure out what scenarios mean the most to me. And there you start having the heart and soul of a risk register being built out. You have what we call key risk indicators that start coming up. In other words, what are things I need to look for? Do I lose power often in my company? Does my building flood? Like simple things like that could be indicators that you're going to lose that capability and your organization is going to come to a screeching halt. So asset management, which is actually one of the key things for good risk management, let's face it, it's number one on the CSIAC, and it's for a reason. Know what you have in house so that you know the things that threaten you. Dana,
Perfect.
let's see.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next question from Bill, he says, the thing is, when one is deployed running military ops, we make risk decisions, targets, assets, timing, and etc. And we do not have a risk committee. So how does this all map to real-time ops?
Yeah, so this comes back to that appetite discussion. So let's say you're about to make a risky decision. Now, by the way, I'm not going to be able to put myself in that context. Clearly, there are decisions that need to be made on the battlefield that a risk program can only go so far, right? Rather, it's the culture that you've built, that questioning attitude that people realize that they're in a situation that needs greater consideration. And if time allows, then the appetite would say, hey, this is a big decision. There could be lives lost here. There could be many assets that are very expensive at stake. Do we want to make that next step? Do we want to go that extra mile? Or do we want to achieve that next extra objective? And if not, back out and cut your losses and or take what you've got. So it's more the mentality that you're starting to get here than the more strategic use of an actual risk committee that's actually making decisions. A risk committee would be classically making decisions more on like, well, what tools are we purchasing for our cybersecurity stack, right? Thinking about quantum computing, and it's coming down the road. Like, are we implementing hybridized crypto agile systems, and that costs money. So do we do it today, or it's a 15-year window for when quantum or Q-Day is supposed to show up? So do we do it next year? That kind of thing. That's where that governance kind of like transcends this notion of it's setting the stage for good decisions being made, more strategic at the highest levels, and clearly down at the operational levels, you're going to be understanding and making the risk decisions that you're alluding to.
Thank you. Next question from Carol. My experience on the risk management is more on the project level. Any thoughts on the risk management program for the strategic / entire enterprise? What are the challenges that most likely occur at the enterprise but not project level?
Oh man, I'm so glad you asked, Carol, because that's actually where I started. I started out in a project controls organization, and a vice president of mine said, Brett, go build a risk program because we don't even know how to spell the word. So I actually started in my life in project risk management. So yes, and all of what I've told you today translates just with different language. Think about governance structure. Maybe you, the project manager, you're your own executive board, and you have people on your team who should be bubbling risks up to you and telling you, hey, I got something that's keeping me up at night. How do I document that? Is there a risk register for the project? And by the way, how does it connect to risks in other projects? So now you start talking about risk interdependency. So hopefully you have a cadre of other project managers that maybe you're speaking to about similar risks, maybe a universal solution that could, beat down a whole series of risks, and you could save resources across a program of projects rather than just one project, taking one individual action. So the principles of what I presented today for enterprise risk absolutely apply to that project level as well. It's just scaling is the question.
Thank you. So I see we're a couple minutes after 1 now. I would like to thank our presenter for a great presentation. I believe we addressed all the comments that I see in the chat. If not, feel free to reach out to Brett directly or reach out to CSIAC. We'll get you in contact with the presenter. If you have more questions about this topic, you also submit a technical inquiry to CSIAC. But we would like to thank SCI as well as Brett for a great presentation. Like I said, the slides are on the website as of right now, and within a day or two, we'll have the full reporting up to the CSIAC webpage as well as our YouTube page. On the way out, make sure to fill out the survey. We do look at that feedback. If you have suggestions for other topics or presenters that you would like to see, please let us know, and we'll make sure to get those addressed. Hopefully, we see you next month for the next installment of the CSIAC monthly webinar series. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, all.
All right.